Hello and welcome to ATG, the podcast, and I'm very pleased to be talking to Orland Hoeber today. Orland, welcome.
All right, thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Michael.
Can we start with your name? It's a fascinating name. What's the origin of it?
So my last name is German. So it used to be H-O with the umlauts, B-E-R. So my grandfather pronounced it Haber, and so I continue to pronounce it Haber. And he moved to Canada in 1918 or so. And my first name is actually English, and my mother is from English origins, and it's a variation on Roland. And so I have a family name, and I was named after my mother's uncle, who kind of had a family history of being a doctor and doing some fighter pilot training in World War II. And so yeah, so
Amazing.
yeah, it's a complex family name, a mix of English and German.
And is that how you were you born in Saskatchewan?
I was born in Saskatchewan. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
You've studied and you work at the University of Regina, which must be quite a sort of it's maybe not the most remote location in Canada, but pretty distant from some of the major conurbations.
Yeah, Canada's a really large country, and so we have a lot of population kind of on the east and the west, and I live in the middle. But I did live in Vancouver for about 5 years, and then so on the west coast, and then lived in St. John's, Newfoundland for 5 years as well. So I've kind of seen both extreme ends or almost extreme ends, and then returned back to the middle.
Fascinating. And where did your interest in computing come from?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I've always been interested in kind of problem solving and trying to make sense of things. And so from an early age, I was just always interested in kind of trying to understand how things worked. And so, I kind of gravitated towards computing kind of slowly. And so when I went into university, kind of started off in a few different science-based disciplines, eventually landing on mathematics and getting an undergrad degree in mathematics. But while I was doing that degree, I took all my electives in computer science because I found that it was more applied and I could leverage my creativity in computer science. Mathematics is all about precision and accuracy and following very strict and structured rules for problem solving, and computer science just all opened up the opportunity for doing creative problem solving. And so I think that's where it really came from. And then I switched from math to computer science in my graduate work. And so all my graduate degrees are in computer science.
That's very interesting because most people, outsiders, would sort of typically regard computing as very precise and should we say mathematical, and yet, but the bit of computing you focused on, human-computer interaction, is very different.
Yes, yeah, no, that kind of happened just over time. And so what I, kind of in those early days of being interested in computing, I was really interested in kind of the technology and the back end. And then over time and with experience, I realized that there's an important aspect of computing that at the time was really not being paid attention to a lot, and that was kind of the human side of it. So we put a lot of kind of work and effort into creating functionality on the back end. But if we don't make that functionality accessible to people, we kind of, what's the use of it if people can't access it? And so I started to realize over time and with experience that, the gateway to all this great functionality is in the interface for humans. And so that's kind of where my transition from kind of back-end technology, precise problem solving, to kind of the what I'll call the fuzziness of human thinking came in, and kind of trying to find a middle ground between that. And so how can we take technology and make it accessible for people so that they can actually do the things that they need to do? So that's kind of, that was the transition, I think, was really realizing that the human brain is very complex, and how do we help the human make good decisions using technology?
Fuzzy is a good word for it because you've specialized in academic information retrieval, but if you ask 5 people how they find information, you probably get 5 different answers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of that is driven by experience. So people tend to gravitate towards things that have worked for them in the past, but our problems kind of change. And so maybe something that has worked for me in the past might not actually work for me in the future because of the nature of the thing that I'm searching for. And so a lot of searches kind of push towards like simple lookup search style of searching. If we look at any search interface, there's a lot of simplicity built into the search interfaces because people are using it for simple search tasks. Just try trying to find one piece of information, a nugget of information, and then move on to their activity. And if that works fine for you, most of the time that's great, and that's what we do. But then when we're faced with something that's more complex in nature, I need to learn about a topic that I don't know much about, yet we still have these tools that are really simple, where we have this kind of gap between what a user needs and what's being provided. And that's kind of the space that I've been kind of working in over the last 8 or 10 years, in this kind of realm of digital libraries and helping people find information in libraries when their search tasks are complex in nature.
You mentioned the distinction between exploratory search and focus searching. So is this what you have in mind?
Yeah. So exploratory search is a bit of a process for searching, and it's the process that we use when we have a search task that's complex in nature. And that complexity can come from a couple of different places. It can come from ambiguity in the search task, for example. It can come from open-endedness. I'm not really sure when I'm done. There's so much information to look at. How do I know when to stop? It can come from multifacetedness. So there's different aspects of the search task that I need to explore and discover and learn about. And so exploratory search processes kind of have us searching first to kind of understand and explore and discover what's available, and then eventually narrow down and do these focus searches on specific things that I'm interested in. And the problem is, how do we kind of aggregate and collate and pull all that information together to support our learning? And people typically use tabs, but if you're like me, you have thousands of tabs open. Well, maybe not thousands, but certainly tens and up to 100 sometimes. And then even finding information amongst all those tabs can be very difficult. And if we flip back to kind of that lookup search, it's really about, I know what I'm looking for. I just need to get the specific details. I'm looking for how to spell the name of an author that I'm looking for. So I can maybe type some queries that are guess at the name, and then I can find the author. I'm looking for a very specific article. I'm looking to see when something was published. That kind of stuff can all be handled with just a simple lookup search, because I'm pretty good at writing a query for something that I know about already.
So there are these two different kinds of search, or at least two, and yet the nature of search, we'll come on to Gen AI in a minute, but the nature of search, ever since sort of the 1990s when Google first came along, hasn't changed very much. There's a search box and you put something in it and you ask a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, that nature of searching really is changing, and what we're giving people are tools for the simple search. And I just think there really is a lack of tools and support for things where it gets more difficult. Just because the default for a lot of people is simple searches. It's what we do probably 95, 98, 99% of the time. The problem is, what about that 1%? What about that 4%? That small group of searches where we really need to engage. What do we do then? And typically we're stuck with the tools for supporting the common search with limited ability to support these more complex search tasks. And kind of that's been a lot of the focus of what we're trying to study within my research group, and what we're trying to kind of deploy as search tools that kind of integrate with existing library systems.
So 25 years ago, libraries would have had what was called the reference desk, and if you were a researcher, or you could go and ask the reference desk, and there'd be somebody nice who would help you to formulate your query, and whether it was exploratory or focused, and help you to get to where you wanted to be. You don't see a reference desk today, so how do users manage to sort of become experienced and competent users of search tools?
Yeah, that really is a great question. That reference librarian was a really important resource that libraries are providing, because people didn't really know how to describe what they were looking for. They didn't really understand the nature of the information space that they were searching within. And so reference librarians existed as this kind of conduit between what a user needed and what the libraries kind of held. And in a lot of ways, what they've been replaced with is a simple query box and somebody typing a few words in a list of search results. And what happens when somebody is not getting what they find? Either they give up, or they continue to kind of try and then give up. Maybe they get lucky and they find it. And the question is, okay, so we have a gap that's been created. At our university, we still have reference librarians, but they really are problem solvers when people really struggle. But it's not just struggling; it's also a commitment to wanting to find it. So a lot of people, when they're searching and they can't find what they're looking for, they give up and maybe they ask some friends, or maybe they just proceed without that information or without that knowledge. And I think from an academic search perspective, from a student support perspective, if they're giving up on their searches, I think that's a really, really big problem, because are we really enabling their learning if we're giving them their tools but without the resources to learn how to search? And so I think there really needs to be a lot more training provided on library search literacy. I think we have this expectation that because people have been searching for, students coming into university, they've been searching their whole lives on Google. But we've trained them to do these simple searches and to do simple lookups and to get the answer and get out without really learning. And the university is all about learning. There's a little bit of finding information, but the whole context of finding that information is to support this bigger picture of learning in a given topic.
That's very interesting, and suggests a role for I think for the library, that to bear out I think what you've said. I remember a piece of research that suggested, and it certainly corresponded with my early use of the internet, that when you use search engines, you tended to search high school students tended to search for a single term, and if they didn't get the result they wanted with that single term, they give up and start with another single term, and thereby sort of not really not helping the model to sort of give them any kind of feedback or anything like that. So it was a very hit and miss kind of approach to search. If we fast forward and we come to Gen AI, the advent of RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, was seen, I think, perhaps by professional searchers as almost a way of sort of reinstating the role of the librarian or the information professional in managing to refine a search to make it more fine-tuned. Do you think that RAG was a successful introduction to searching?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good question. So RAG is a mechanism that uses generative AI to automate two really important aspects of searching. It automates query refinement, query expansion. So it takes the query that the user types in, maybe 1 or 2 words, and then it uses a large language model to try to identify other terms that might be relevant and might be similar and related to those terms. And it issues multiple queries to the back end of the search system. And then it takes those and it aggregates those together and does a re-ranking, and then instead of letting the user look at the list of re-ranked search results, it automates the process of choosing relevant search results and then generates an answer out of that. And so in a lot of ways, it's automating two really, really important steps that traditionally we've asked the user to do. You need to write your own query, you need to evaluate your own search results. And so in that regard, it's actually serving as a support system, an artificial intelligence kind of replacement for the human intelligence of, let me help you write a better query, let me help you find the best search results. And so it works great in those contexts where the user knows what they're looking for, because they can write at least a reasonably good starting query, and that query could be a couple terms, it could be a question. It supports all these different styles of asking for information. And so that's great because it can automate that. But if I don't know what I'm looking for to start with, the starting point can then really quickly pull me in a direction that I don't really intend. And the risk that we face with RAG is that if a user doesn't really know what they're looking for, the AI is assuming what they need, what they're interested in, and then the answers that are provided in such a confident tone and so well written that when somebody doesn't really understand what they're looking for, they get convinced that that's what they want, and it pulls them in a completely different direction than their actual intended need, because they're convinced by the firmness and the accuracy and the quality of the answer that's provided. And so I think that's where we have RAG working great in those circumstances where somebody really knows what they're looking for, they really understand the concept, and they're just trying to augment their intelligence or augment their knowledge. Versus what if somebody really is learning to start? They're learning really from the beginning. Is it pushing them in a direction that they may not intend? And will they even notice that it's pushing them in a direction they may not intend? I think those are really interesting questions that we should be asking ourselves, rather than kind of pushing RAG as the solution to all search problems. I think it's a solution to some search problems, but in some ways it may be a detriment to other searching. For example, searching with the purpose of learning when I don't know much to start with. And in that space of academic searching, where we're helping students search for the purposes of learning in the context of a course that they're taking or a research project they're undertaking, we need to think carefully about whether there are better ways to kind of keep the user agency in the search process and leveraging the generative AI and leveraging the large language models, maybe in more precise spaces rather than in helping me build a better query and completely removing the choice of what I'm really looking for amongst the search results.
So is this what you meant when you said in a recent presentation, we're providing answers where the result might be knowledge rather than answers?
Yeah. So I think RAG and retrieval augmented generation and a lot of the Gen AI type approaches to searching are very much focused on let's turn every query into a question and let's turn every response into an answer. And from a learning perspective, if I just gave my students, I say here is a question and here's the answer, and we jump completely over the process of learning how to get to that answer, how much of that answer is going to be retained after the class? Very, very little. And again, in those contexts where I don't need to retain it, I don't need to learn. If I'm trying to figure out, let's say, directions to a certain location or some things that I should do when I'm visiting a new city, I don't need to kind of learn that deeply. I just need some answers. Maybe I'll write down a few notes and then I'll go on my merry way. But in an academic realm, I think we're doing students a bit of a disservice if we're just giving them the answer all the time without showing them the process and the journey of learning why that answer is the answer, but also what are some alternative answers that might come up. And so I think the turning every query into an answer is fine in those contexts where all I need is an answer. But if I don't need an answer, I need to actually learn along the way. There are, I think, better ways of letting the user stay involved in the search process. And so this is something we've started to call workspace augmented generation. We have retrieval augmented generation, which is automating some of the retrieval process. But if we let the user continue to query, we let the user look at search results, we let the user save what they're interested in the workspace, and then when they return to the workspace later on, we can use large language models and generative AI to summarize what was found. It's then summarizing what I had the control over choosing, and it's helping me to return to my search activity later in a more efficient and a more effective way.
It sounds fascinating. I've just been reading about Charles Darwin, whose method of working was to fill notebook after notebook with questions. But I suspect they were the kind of questions that didn't have simple retrieval answers. So maybe this might be a way of helping him do his work. So is this achievable though with what you describe, the workspace augmented generation? Is this achievable with a simple search box?
Well, I think some of the studies that we've done recently, the answer is yes. We have prototypes and we have experience in developing systems to help searchers, keep track of their search activities as they're searching, save things into workspaces, organize them within those workspaces, and so the activity of letting the user maintain control, that's kind of the standard paradigm of searching already. I issue a query, I get a list of search results. Typically, what I would do is I would click on them, they open them up in new tabs. In the prototypes we've been developing and the systems we've been developing, instead of opening up in new tabs, we have a mechanism of saving them into a workspace structure. And I'm not talking about a single workspace, a single place for putting them, but what we call a multi-workspace. So for each different search interest that I have a different workspace so that my saved search results don't all get mashed together into the same space. That's currently what happens right now when we're saving search results just in tabs, is we have just tab after tab after tab, and it's all just this big mess of information. We're trying to manage that tab-based approach by removing tabs and putting it in the context of saving within these multi-workspaces. But then we've started to do some experimentation of, how do we visualize what those workspaces look like, the queries that I issued, how successful I was, and so on. We've done some experimentation with how do we let searchers build nested workspaces so they can kind of restructure and organize the information they found. We've done some experimentation with using large language models and generative AI to generate concise summaries of what has been found. And some of the recent work that we're doing right now is even letting the users go in and edit and fix mistakes that are being created by the large language model and the Gen AI, so that can then be learned, so those mistakes don't get replicated with future summaries that are being generated. So I think there's a lot of space for leveraging generative AI beyond what I would consider the low-hanging fruit of help me build a better query and help me remove the requirement of me choosing the search results. If I still want to have the control over the search results, why not let me continue to have that control so that I can organize what I found and I can put my human intelligence into the search process rather than doing what we call cognitive offloading. We offload all the thinking to the AI so that we don't have to think anymore. Seems like it's a good idea until we become so reliant on our devices and the technology that we don't have an ability to have an original thought anymore. And so I think that's the slippery slope that we're sliding down with cognitive offloading and Gen AI giving us answers. And I think we need to kind of put a few brakes on and say, I think there's some space for the user to stay involved in the search activity and stay thinking as they're searching, because that's how we learn, is by thinking as we do rather than just giving an answer at the end.
You realise the system isn't giving you quite what you want when you find that Amazon recommends the book you bought your grandmother last Christmas as the next book for you to read.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes.
So you've been working in this area sort of for several years, and I believe it's resulted in a product which is now actually running at your university library.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that product is called Dilex Search. And so the problem that we identified, this is a really interesting story about Dilex Search, because it occurred to me while I was standing in line at a grocery store. And so I was in this queue at a grocery store waiting to for the checkout. And I was thinking about a research project that I'd been working on for the last couple of months. And I wanted to do a little bit of a lit review to see, well, has anybody else been doing something in this same space? And so, I had a few minutes while I was waiting in line. So I pulled up my phone and I started doing a search. And I had an epiphany or a realization. And that was, this might be kind of a common thing that people are thinking about their searching when they're in these kind of spaces between activities. But also, how am I going to take what I'm finding and make it accessible and available when I get back to my computer? So I'm doing some searching. I'm kind of saving a few things in tabs on my phone. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a better way for me to kind of get this back to my computer. So the thoughts that came were, we don't finish searches in a single session. Cross-session searching is a real thing. I need to search and then stop and then search again and then stop and then search again. In the academic realms, this is very, very common. I can't find everything I need in a single session. And then students, non-students, former students, we have mobile devices around us all the time, and increasingly we're seeing students using their mobile phones as kind of almost their first source of information, their first device that they pick up when they're trying to do something rather than their computers or their laptops. And so we have this notion of cross-session searching, but also cross-device searching, and how can we maintain all this activity and, more importantly, help the user get back to searching when they have more time, either starting on their phone and continuing on their phone between different classes, starting on their phone and going to their computer and they're back to their phone. How do we maintain all this information? And how do we help somebody find what they were doing so that they can continue on? And so I had a grad student at the time, and we had a good conversation about, what can we do here? And we came up with a couple different prototype ideas, and then one looked to be really, really promising, leveraging visualization techniques to help somebody see a timeline of their search activity, how many queries they issued, how successful those queries were in saving search results, and so on. And then, so we deployed that as a prototype system. We ran some user studies, and then we thought we should should go and show our librarians this and see what they think. And when we came to the library and we gave them a demo, the first response they got was, how do we get this deployed within the library? Which is always a really nice thing to hear when you're a creator and a designer, is when people say, well, how do I get this for myself? And then we realized that the normal academic realm of research to product deployment has a really, really long time gap or a lag. So typically when we publish research, it could take up to 10 years for research that is published and studied and experimented with, and we have some evidence saying this is a good thing, up to 10 years for that to actually appear in product. And so we thought, are we willing to wait 10 years for this technique that we think is really relevant right now for the way students are searching? And so the answer was no, we aren't willing to wait 10 years. And so we created a company called Dilex Search, and we took a research prototype, which, again, was designed specifically for the purposes of just conducting user studies. And we put a lot of effort into essentially creating it so that it was robust enough for proper deployment at a university and to handle the workload of actual university searching. And so the Dilex Search is the name of that company, and it plugs into kind of the search infrastructure of one particular vendor called Ex Libris, and their search platform is called Primo. So we plug directly into Primo with kind of very low overhead for the searcher. They just need to click the right button, and then they have this kind of mechanism of maintaining their search activities across many different search sessions. So this doesn't replace if I just need to do a quick search. The existing mechanisms for doing quick searches, trying to find one particular thing, still exist. It's just if I know that I'm going to be doing searching that is going to extend over multiple sessions, we have this other pathway to searching within our university library.
So when did it go live?
We went live about a year and a half ago, and we went live with the university that I work at, and so we were able to kind of deploy to them. And then we started talking to other university libraries, and it was happening right at a time that university library budgets were kind of contracting quite a bit. And so it's been a little bit hard to convince other university libraries to deploy, but we've focused instead on kind of having a sales team. We've been focusing on creating awareness and trying to advocate for this through presentations and through publications and through things like this podcast, where we can say, I think we really need to think carefully about library searching and how we can make it better in the long run. And a lot of our more recent thoughts have been, if we can support somebody searching across different sessions, that there's actually an accessibility aspect to this as well. So a lot of accessibility research focuses on physical and sensory disabilities and trying to make search interfaces and technology and software kind of available for people that have difficulty just using software because they can't physically interact with the keyboard or the mouse or the trackpad, or they can't see what's on the screen very well. But there's another kind of group of students, group of people that I think we also need to be thinking about in terms of accessibility, and that's people with a broad range of neurodiversity. And that seems to almost be, there's a couple hints in some of the accessibility guidelines about supporting people that have neurodiversity, but I think that it's kind of almost a secondary thing. And what we're trying to do is pull that into more of a primary focus now. And so if we think about people with dyslexia or people with ADHD, the common kind of outcome of those conditions is that they have limitations placed on their working memory, and they have limitations placed on their focus or their attention. And what this means is that a lot of times the searching becomes very fragmented because they lose focus, they have a hard time kind of maintaining what they're actually doing, and all the things that we're doing to support cross-session searching also support people with a broad range of neurodiversity. So the reality is that if we can support a broad range of ability in terms of being able to maintain focus and maintain attention on search tasks, then we support everybody. And I think that's the ultimate goal of accessibility, is if we can have accessible search, we can support all people. And from a university perspective, that's one of our goals, is supporting all abilities of students to the best of their ability.
So you may only have one site, but surely as a researcher, you're in the sort of the dream scenario that instead of doing simulated searches, you've actually got a sort of thousands of live users, and you can do your user research on actual evidence. So what have you discovered so far? What's the feedback?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I'm really lucky because I'm actually conducting research on people that are like me. A lot of times, what happens in computer science is that we develop interfaces, and we develop algorithms and tools for other people, and we have to kind of put ourselves in their position. We're building tools for students, so I have students building tools for students. We're building tools for researchers. We're building tools for academics, and so that makes it actually really nice because I can completely envision what is needed. Because what is needed is what I need. What is needed is what my students need. What is needed is what our university population needs. And I have direct access to that university population. So we are running user studies on all our prototypes with students, following the typical research ethics board kind of mechanisms of, maintaining, privacy and anonymity and so on. So that's kind of really important as well, because we want to make sure that, we do have honest research that's happening. And what we started to find is that when we give students tools to support cross-session searching, in the very first session, they don't really appreciate or they don't grasp the value of these tools and techniques. And so if we do measures on things like usefulness, ease of use, satisfaction, user engagement, and so on, they tend to be more or less the same as our baseline systems. But when we have a gap of time and we bring them back, let's say a week later, and we ask them to resume their search tasks, then they see the value of having maintained all that information. They see the value of being able to visualize past search activities and the value of how that helps me to kind of resume my search tasks. We then see really, really big increases on those typical measures. In terms of time performance, it doesn't make searching any faster, but in some ways that's actually good. A fast search is not necessarily a quality search. If we have somebody who's highly engaged in searching and taking their time and really digging deep, I think that's a great value to have come out of a user study compared to somebody who does it really quickly and maybe doesn't really learn something along the way. And then in terms of, are they finding better quality documents? Ultimately, the library that we're searching underneath has the exact same collection for our baseline systems and the ones that we're studying. And so we don't often find, big changes in the precision or the quality of the search results, but we do often find that they're saving more and they're finding more, and what they have are higher quality. And so, these are all really good things from a researcher perspective. And then they're also really good things from an entrepreneur perspective, where we now have actual evidence that says this is actually something that is worth deploying in actual product, because we have the evidence that says students are actually finding value in it.
Well, one of the things I noticed about Dilex Search is that if you use it in the kind of simple mode, you would say, sort of, it's pretty much transparent in that it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't perform any differently, which is, I suppose, a good and a bad thing. It's in that it doesn't interrupt, if you like, the standard search process, but at the same time, it doesn't show off what the system can do. Is it the case that Dilex Search requires an element of training to become aware, because people won't realize what they've been missing, given that they've grown up, most people, with Google and sort of these instantaneous results, for better or worse?
Yeah, I think that's very true. Like, I think because students and just people in general have been trained on Google, Google and Google's competitors, where simple is better, and when you do a search, you find what you need, and then you get out and you forget about it. I think this idea of helping people maintain kind of interest in searching and maintain kind of that search task over multiple sessions, that does need a little bit of awareness of maybe a little bit of self-awareness initially, that I'm not really doing just a quick lookup. This is a search that I'm going to be doing over the course of the semester or the next couple of years if it's for a graduate degree. And so I think there needs to be a little bit of self-awareness of searching needs, and then making good choices amongst the tools that are available. And then once you choose the tool, again, we designed Dilex Search to actually be very simple, very low overhead. What we call it is lightweight additions to an existing search paradigm that people are very, very familiar with. And then those lightweight additions kind of are there, they don't get in the way, but when you do notice them and you think about it and you see what's being shown, then that helps you to kind of make sense of things. And so when we run our user studies, we often run like little mini training sessions showing the features, but these are typically like 2 or 3 minutes. Here's what this feature does, here's what this feature does. And, students are able to pick that up in our user studies really, really quickly. And so, having software where we need to train people on it, I think we have to be very careful about that, because nobody wants to go through training sessions on using software. What we're trying to focus on is walk up and learn style of search interfaces, where you don't need to go through training. You can just start using it and then maybe start noticing things that exist, and then maybe start experimenting with those things that exist to start to see the value and so on. We have done some training videos as LibGuides within our university if somebody is interested in actually really seeing how the system is being used. But again, we know that people are busy. We know that students don't want to put a lot of effort into learning tools. We want them to learn ideas. We want them to learn concepts. We want them to learn things for the courses. We need to make the tools simple and easy to get started with, and then surface this extra information, these extra features, in a way that is non-obtrusive but still apparent. And I think that's the balancing act that we're trying to play with Dilex Search, but also with all the other research that is happening in my research group on how to kind of essentially build better search interfaces for students.
It's surely this goes right back to your early days in sort of human-computer interaction. It's sort of there's a potential clash here in that although maybe it's a bit oversimplistic, it's sort of widely thought that human-computer interaction is all about 2 clicks are worse than 1, and the faster you can get to your results, the better it is. But what you're describing is in some ways the opposite.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really insightful point. A lot of stuff that we've done kind of in the early days of HCI and maybe even in the current days of HCI is focused very much on efficiency. And I think that this also is very much a paradigm of search, search engine systems as well, is, Google and Bing and so on. They want fast. They want to get users kind of getting their answers and then moving on. And if we're really just looking for an answer engine, that is the main thing. But if we're looking to engage somebody in learning and thinking, I think pumping the brakes and slowing people down and giving them an opportunity to think is really, really important in terms of enabling learning. And so fast isn't always the primary mechanism, but it seems to be the default starting point for almost all kind of HCI and information retrieval and that type of research is fast first. And I've been trying to I'm swimming upstream on that one a little bit, because I think that fast is great, but there are places where fast is not the right answer. We need to have things that are thoughtful. And then the question is, what are those spaces where we need thoughtfulness, and what are those spaces where we need fast, and making good choices in what we deploy for those different things.
So perhaps a reasonable description of Dilex is that it solved one of the fundamental problems of search, which is that Google forgets from one session to another everything I asked last time. It doesn't know anything about me. But if we move on for that, to sort of imagine the typical sort of undergraduate or researchers even, where you're actually starting, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from a body of existing knowledge. And you'd like to take that body of existing knowledge into account. And that might be your own knowledge, or it might be some of the knowledge in the library in the domain where you're studying. So do you think a search system, a better search system, could make use of, in some way, tap into what you already know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the difficult part from a technology perspective is, how do you encapsulate or capture that knowledge that you already know, and again, on an individual basis. All right. So if I imagine, myself as a researcher and a couple of my grad students also as researchers, and maybe a doctoral student and a postdoc, and we're all working on a project that is interrelated. What I know is different than what my master's students know, which is different than what my postdoc, my PhD students know, and and not saying that I know everything. They end up knowing a lot more about the technology and how to build things. I know more things about the bigger kind of the picture and the high level view of things. And so we have these kind of different spheres of knowledge that are kind of overlapping a little bit, but also are separate from one another. And so the question is, if we want to build a search interface that is leveraging what I already know, independent of what other people already know, and then build on that, we almost need to have a mechanism of keeping track of my search activities over a very long period of time so that my knowledge can actually be captured or encapsulated somewhere. So this is where I think the idea of Dilex Search and keeping track of my search activities and keeping track of what I found and what I saved and what I deleted and the queries that I used and when and so on can be very valuable as almost a data gathering tool to support some future vision of being able to kind of leverage that to fine-tune searching to avoid things that I already know and I already found, and push me or prod me to look in spaces where I actually haven't explored yet. So I think there's a lot of scope for further research and further development once we have a baseline framework of capturing existing knowledge. Having said that, one of the things we've been thinking about in the Dilex Search kind of realm is if I'm an academic searcher, maybe I have a new grad student and I want to get them started on searching in a particular space or a particular domain, maybe I could do some searching myself for them, find some relevant search results, and then maybe just a few more queries, some more search results, and then package that up and send it to them and say, here is a Dilex Search episode or session that I did for you, and now becomes theirs, and they can see the queries that I use. They can see where I found success in using the queries, where I found some failures. Maybe I would intentionally put in some bad queries and show that, this is a dead end for searching. Here are some positive ends. And so in some ways, we can almost encapsulate our search activity and hand it off to somebody and say, why don't you replay this search session, see how it's going, look at the search results that I found, look at the ones that I chose not to save so you can identify what's not relevant, and use that almost as a learning tool for kickstarting knowledge generation. Instead of me trying to describe it to somebody, I can just give it to them. So that's something that we're actually working on right now as a future enhancement of Dilex Search.
I would have thought as a really simple starting point, as you know, GenAI is derived from a corpus, and that corpus, if you think about your research activity, and you as a professional researcher, this should be the easiest position of all, in that your job is to if you like output your knowledge in a form that can be digested. It happens to be digested by LLMs, but it can be digested by humans as well. And surely the collective knowledge that your research activity and your research group collectively works on should incorporate that knowledge. So you'd expect that all your graduate students to know and to have read the papers you've written, for example, and a kind of an LLM or maybe the ideal scenario for a search engine might be something that says, I know who you are, I know what you've written, I know what you're studying, and so this is the collective, if you like, knowledge within this domain that I would expect your team to know.
Yeah, and I think that works great when people are working in, let's say, narrow research fields. My research field has gotten very broad and diverse, and so I wouldn't expect my grad students to read everything that I've written, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've written that might not be relevant to their particular project. So I think I think the idea is really good. Can we identify who somebody is and then build an LLM around that body of knowledge, not just as a RAG-based approach of finding things and giving answers, but almost as a mechanism of asking it questions. Ask my body of literature questions so that answers can be generated out of that. I think that'd be very, very interesting. I think it's much more interesting if it's a narrower scope, but certainly, even somebody with a very, very broad research scope, it could still identify the differences between my different research areas, because, that's one of the powers of large language models, is understanding the nature of language and how terminology in one space is not necessarily the same as terminology in another space, and being able to see those differences. And so I think there's, yes, certainly lots of opportunity for the use of large language models and generative AI beyond, again, its current use, which is expanding a query and choosing what's relevant and generating an answer. I think there's a lot more that can be done, and I think it's a really exciting time to be a researcher in this space of interactive information retrieval, because there's so much opportunity for leveraging this really, really powerful technology but we need to consider what the users need first. And I think we have a risk commonly when there's new technology is we try to apply the technology to every problem, hoping that there's an answer. And I think we've seen this being deployed with generative AI being deployed in products around the world over the last 2 years. We've seen what I consider is, throwing generative AI at the wall and seeing what's going to stick. And I think, there's a lot of wasted effort on things that as academic researchers, we know that there's no value in doing that. And I've seen this over and over that, that's a waste of time, that's a waste of time. And I think we need to take a step back and think about generative AI for the purposes of enabling human intelligence. So human intelligence first, how do we enable it with generative AI? I heard a term recently where somebody was talking about how we commonly talk about human in the loop AI, and we need to flip it around, and we need to actually have the human on the outside, and we have the AI in the loop of human intelligence. And I think that's a really, really great way of thinking of things. The human intelligence is the most important thing. How do we bend the AI to our will, to our needs, design it so it's doing what we need rather than forcing us to do things that the AI needs? Yeah.
That's great. What would you call it? AI in the human loop?
So it's AI in the loop, and the implication is that the human is the driver of the loop rather than a human in the loop for AI stuff. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, is this what when you talk about when you use the phrase Gen AI risk, which you said sort of is offloading the cognitive aspect of searching to the AI rather than leaving it to the human? So, do you think it's possible to design a Gen AI system that avoids that Gen AI risk?
I think that there's possibility of doing it. I think ultimately the question is, can it reliably determine what the user actually needs? A lot of times what we're giving the AI in terms of information is a few words, a question. And if there's ambiguity in any way built into that, I think it's really hard for any artificial intelligence to really disambiguate things. What we've started to see with a lot of retrieval augmented generation and question answering is it can start to identify that there is maybe some diversity in the search results that are coming up, and then it can say, if you mean this, here's an answer. If you mean this, here's an answer. If you mean this, here's an answer. So there is some movement in that direction, which I think is really, really good. And then the question really is, how far can we take this? At what point can we rely on it so that it's making the right determination of what I really need and what I want? And what happens if it's wrong? Are there mechanisms where I can then step back and take control? And I think that we really need to think carefully about that. If we offload all things to the AI at all times, the human agency in all our activities just kind of is given up. And people I think are much better when they feel a sense of ownership of the things that they're doing. They feel a sense of responsibility of the things that they're doing. And so this then actually makes them put more attention to it. And we see this over and over with students. When students don't really care about a class, they don't put a lot of effort into it. When they do care about it, they put a lot of effort into it. And this is just human nature. If you care about something, you do it well. And then the question is, if we then remove the ability of being able to care and we offload the choice of do I care about it or not to the AI, and it's making the wrong decisions for me, is it pushing me down a path that I don't really want to be on? And is there a mechanism of me to rewind that and get to the spot where I now have agency? And so I think that's a long-winded way of saying, I think whatever we do with AI, we need to make sure that we always give the users the ability to step in and override. And I think that's something that seems to be missing a little bit in what we're seeing with generative AI and large language models being integrated into things where everything's get pushed to an answer. And being able to then ask it, can you show me all of your sources so that I can decide what's relevant? That's getting harder and harder. We still get a few references here and there, but if I wanted to see, show me everything so that I can decide what is really relevant for me. That seems to be more and more difficult.
Surely one of the great achievements of Gen AI, there's an awful lot of AI gets a lot of bad press and coming up with sort of unverified results and some hallucinations and all this sort of thing. But one of the achievements has been that it is drawing on a much wider corpus than anything that's hitherto been available. I mean, that the university library has sort of been sort of is just a tiny proportion proportion of the world's knowledge. And similarly, I used to work with publishers providing tools for the publisher's walled garden kind of index of their own content, which is only a fraction. Even the world's largest publisher, Elsevier, only has a small proportion of all academic content. So in that respect, GenAI has already made a major step forward. So don't you think the kind of Dilex approach that you've got should really be working on a larger scale, a larger corpus? It should be working sort of with GenAI maybe because that will give your students a sort of the largest possible content to draw on.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's a common kind of expectation that more is better. I think if we look in the realm of academic searching, I think if we say quality resources are better than more resources, and this is one of the values that an academic library has, is it's a curated collection of high quality academic resources that don't include things like predatory publishing journals. Everything has been vetted and gone through proper peer review processes. And I think this is really important from an academic perspective, because anybody can write anything and put it up on the internet and have it be consumed by the back-end systems that are generating these large language models. And what that means is that large language models include a lot of noise. And the big companies have put a lot of effort into fine-tuning things so that when that noise becomes offensive noise, it gets removed or detuned or defocused. And I think that's the risk of all human knowledge isn't quality knowledge. There are things that people believe and they write about that are just obviously incorrect, and that becomes part of these large language models. And so I would argue that if we were going to build a large language model specifically for academic searching, I would want to consume only academic resources. The difficulty and the challenge with this is those academic resources are all copyrighted by the authors and by the publishers. And so for this to actually really happen, we need to see the big publishers like Elsevier and Sage and so on all working together to aggregate their quality knowledge and turn that into a quality large language model and make those available to universities and academic research institutions so that we can say, here is good quality academic knowledge encapsulated in a large language model. And I think that would be far better than just using these kind of general purpose large language models, which again are perfectly fine for general purpose activities. Great for rewriting things, great for trying to kind of streamline and provide summaries of clearly provided information because it understands the nature of human language. But does it really understand knowledge? And I'm a skeptic about whether large language models really have understanding. They're a mathematical formulation of how language works in English, as a specific example. But is there really knowledge there, or is it really just these are words that kind of fit together and that people have fit together in their writing? And I think we need to kind of keep that human thinking involved in searching, human thinking involved in assessing answers that we're getting.
Well, I agree. I don't think a language model has yet come up with with an answer to Darwin that says you're really thinking about natural selection, except that nobody's used that term yet. No, it sounds very good. But surely the logical place to do this is not with the publishers, but the institution themselves. In that the dream about open access, the dream about green open access, all the pioneers of open access dreamed about that all academic content going into the institution. The institutions put all that content together. Hey presto, you've got the academic large language model.
Yes, yeah, and that's true. That would be, the institutions kind of then have ownership of the research that was created at their institutions. We need to get all the institutions working together so that we can aggregate it together. If we only have the content that's being generated at one university, it's part of the picture. And really the academic kind of process is that we don't have any academic research that is in complete isolation. Everything builds upon other things. And so the trick is, how do we aggregate all this knowledge together, all this writing and this content together in a way that it fits and it's available for these types of things. So I think certainly for the future, as universities are moving more and more towards requiring open access publications, I think we're going to get there, but then we're going to have to go back and somehow take advantage and pull in all the information that is still behind closed doors and include that, because otherwise it's a snapshot from some point in time moving forward, but it doesn't have the foundations on which that research was built. And so I think we really need to have partnership for these types of things. I don't think any one company can do it on their own, because no one company or university owns all the knowledge. We each own our silos of knowledge, and how do we pull them together? And again, the whole mechanisms of building large language models by big companies like OpenAI and so on has been just consume as much as they can get their hands on, without any attention to what is quality and what is not quality. And I think that has worked fine as a proof of concept and as a toolkit for kind of streamlining communication and so on. But is it really the right thing for academic work? I think we need to do more.
So switching to you personally, are you using Gen AI in your personal life?
I use it as a question answering tool, right? So if I have a little mini question about something, I ask it. So, every once in a while, if I'm preparing a lecture for something, I might look at my previous lecture notes or think about something that I want to talk about, and I'll write a few things down. And if I get stuck on a word or stuck on, a very specific concept that I know and I understand, I might ask for a couple different versions of explanations just to kind of see how it might be writing those things. And then I look at that and say, okay, I understand a little bit more deeply, and then I write my own. So I don't use it as a copy and paste tool. I use it as just verify things that I think I know and just make sure that I know the full breadth of things. So from a teaching perspective, I use it as just a little mini tool for just double checking a few facts. For my own academic writing, I'm an old school human intelligence writer. I want to write things myself because I want to explain it the way I'm thinking about it. And this is what I encourage my grad students to do as well. That the reason why we write things down is to actually force our brains to understand what we're writing. If I can't write it, that's a sign that I don't really understand it. Then I have to take a step back and think about it a bit more, and then try to write it again. And that writing and thinking are two things that are very, very closely intertwined. And so as a writer, in some ways, I don't want generative AI to do the writing for me, because it's really helping me to show that I understand what I know. I allow my students to do some streamlining of their writing. If they write a first draft and they feel like they're not really comfortable with the grammar, they can run it through a Gen AI and ask it to do some rewriting. But I require that they go through and read it very carefully and make sure that these are the things that they want to say. If they don't, there's a risk of it actually changing very, very specific academic terminology into things that really don't make sense. Switching something like a research question into a research inquiry. From a language perspective, those are the same, but really it's not the same from an academic perspective. And so I think it's great. It's a great question answering tool. I don't really use it for deeper learning because I want to engage in thinking, and I want to make sure that I continue to exercise my brain. And this is what I want our students to do as well, is exercise their brains. And yeah, and I think if we offload everything onto the AI, we lose this ability to control what we really think. And I think that's one of the biggest risks that we're facing right now, not just in academia, but just as a society. Who's in control of what we think? You can make the case that maybe we're less control now than we've ever been in what we think.
You're unlike most of us. All of us use searching like Google's many times a day, but you're doing it not only for your leisure time, but also for your professional activity. Can you imagine a time when you wouldn't do any search? Can you imagine a new year where you take 10 days off and switch everything off?
Yeah, no, I can't imagine that. I think because I engage in searching because I do research on searching. And so in some ways, whenever I start to do a search, I actually pause and think about, why am I doing this? How am I doing it? What am I doing? Is there something that we could do for a future research project to streamline this process? And so, even, I've seen some of my colleagues doing research on having a chat interface and a search interface side by side. When you issue a query, it goes to both. And this idea of how do you do this parallel searching for resources, but also asking asking the chat to give answers. And I think there's some really interesting kind of things that can happen in that space of parallel searching. I'm always interested in kind of using my phone because I see students using theirs all the time. So I try to, as much as possible, think about if I was a student and I was searching for something, how would I do it? Because this is how insight happens, is we put ourselves in the space and in the place of the people that we're trying to help. And then we try to see what the real problems are and where the potential solutions are. And so I can't see myself stopping doing that, because I actually want to continue to think about it and engage with it, because I love doing research. And when we love doing research, it's never really work. So even on vacation, I'm still thinking about these things because, they're part of my identity of trying to come up with better ways of helping people find information. And ultimately, that's the goal. Searching is the technique. But the goal we have is finding information and doing things with that information. So, information behavior, information seeking behavior, those are the bigger picture things. Information search behavior, that's the low level doing the searching. And that doesn't exist in isolation. That exists in a larger environment of wanting to do things with information.
Well, I, for one, am very gratified, and I think I benefit from. I'm one of those people who does a lot of searching, but I think it's enormously beneficial that somebody takes time to reflect and consider and evaluate how searching works and how it could be improved. And I think there's still a huge amount that can be done. So we're very grateful to you all, and many thanks for your time in talking about the work you do, and look forward to seeing your next discoveries and innovations. Thanks a lot.
All right, fantastic. And thanks so much for your insightful questions. I appreciate your time as well.